Okay, so in the last video, we left off looking at that blank canvas of our first GUI application. So now what I want to take a look at is how we can go about adding some content to it. So the two major things that we're going to need to introduce into our application are going to be some controls, as well as some kind of container that we can put those controls into. So we'll first, as we go through this sequence of steps to set up our application, we'll first go through creating those controls that will be in our scene. We'll then go ahead and create a layout container, and we'll add the controls to that layout container. And then we'll also go ahead and create a scene object and add the layout container to that scene object. And that scene object is what we're going to place onto our stage, onto that primary stage that we have in our application already. So our layout containers will include a couple of different things like hboxes, vboxes, and grid panes. So this little bit that I've got right here again is addressing that design aspect of our GUI applications. So right now it might not make a lot of sense to you. I'll explain a little bit more about this once we've created this application. We'll address that in the next video. But essentially what we're looking at here is we've got our hbox and we've got some kind of label that we want to put inside of that hbox. So when I talk about hboxes, what I mean is horizontal boxes, essentially a container that will take a set of items that it can place in a single row, essentially in a horizontal layout. So the next little bit of code that I'm going to show is going to be broken up into two parts, since we'll need to fit it together in two slides. That's going to break down setting up a JavaFX application where we're actually going to start adding some content. So taking a look at the first part. So this first part primarily is showing the different import statements we're going to need now. So in addition to bringing in our application and our stage, we're also going to bring in a scene, so something that we can put onto the stage, and we're going to include a container and a control. So our container is going to be hbox. With our scene, that comes from the scene package. All of our containers and controls also come from that scene package, but each one will have its own kind of sub-package. So if we look at, say, with hbox, that comes from the layout package in the scene package. And then with our label, that comes from the control package in the scene package. So then we've got the actual body, or the header and the body of our class. So in this particular case, I'm making a separate project. We're calling this one Hello World. This is going to extend, again, it's going to extend our application, so we'll need to do that for every JavaFX application. We then have our main method. Inside of there, we've got our call to launch with our args being passed in. Then included a comment here indicating where the start method is supposed to go. So if we take a look at the next slide, we can see the body of that start method. So again, same header as before, public void start, passing in a stage called primary stage. We, at the very beginning, will set up our two controls, or our one control and our one container. So the control is going to be our label. So we're specifying that as the class label. We'll then go ahead and make a call to the label constructor. With the labels constructor, it's going to be taking a string for some text that we want to display using that label. The next one's going to be our hbox. So convention that I'm going to follow for quite a few of these applications is to just name the containers using the class name, but in all lowercase. So in this case, my name for my hbox object is just going to be hbox. This is going to be equal to a new hbox. Again, we're calling the constructor. In this case, with the hbox constructor, what this is going to be taking is the different items that I want to put into that horizontal arrangement. So right now, the only thing I need to put in is the message label. Once I've got that set up, then we'll go ahead and create our scene object that we're going to put into our stage. And that scene object will be expecting the top level container for my scene. So in this case, since hbox is the only container we're using, that'll be the only thing that it would make sense to put there. So we'll go ahead and include that in the constructor for that scene. We'll then go ahead and include another method that we call on our primary stage, which is setScene. We'll pass in that scene object so that we can actually display that content in our application window. So let's go ahead and minimize this and start getting all of that set up. So come back into NetBeans. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this project. We'll go ahead and close the window for it. And let's go ahead and create a new project for this. So again, this is going to be a JavaFX application. We'll go ahead and keep that set up as it was before. For this one, so I'll go ahead and give it the name that I specified earlier, which is going to be Hello World. Go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and click Finish. And again, once it sets this up, it's going to have all of that usual boilerplate code, so that sort of default code that it gives us. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all of this comment at the beginning. We're going to remove this extra comment here. Let's go ahead and remove all of these extra imports. We'll add the extra one, or the additional ones that we're going to need in a moment. And we'll also go ahead and remove all of the code in the body of the start method. I'll just do everything from scratch there and make a few quick adjustments. And also go ahead and remove this extra comment here. Oops. Go ahead and grab the main method. Move that there. And then we can go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to go ahead and do, so we noted that there were a couple of additional imports we want to include. So we've got the import for the application class. We've got an import for the stage class. In addition to that, I'm going to have another import for the scene class. So we'll do import JavaFX.scene. So this will come from that scene package. We'll get the scene class. We'll also go ahead and bring in our one control and our one container for this. So I'll do an import javafx.scene.control, and this is going to be for our label. So we'll go ahead and grab that, and then also go ahead and do one for our layout, or for a container. And that comes from the layout package. So we'll have javafx.scene.layout.hbox, and then we'll go ahead and save all of that. Okay, so then once we've got that, then we'll come into our start method and we'll go ahead and start setting up all of the code to set up our control, set up our container, set up our scene, and then display that in the stage. So for our control, we're just going to be doing a label, so we'll go ahead and specify that as our class type. We'll go ahead and call this message label. Say this is equal to a new label, so we'll go ahead and call the constructor for it. Inside of here, we're going to pass in some text that we want to display with this label. And we'll just put in the string hello world for this. Next, we'll go ahead and set up the container that we're going to be putting this label inside of. So for that, we're going to be doing an hbox. Again, as I mentioned, I'm just going to call it hbox in all lowercase. So that'll be my object's name. So be equal to a new hbox. Go ahead and call that constructor as well. And inside of here, we want to put in the message label, since that's the one item, the one control that I want to have contained inside of this hbox. So put that message label there. Save that much. Then what we're going to go ahead and do is set up the scene. So following pretty much the same pattern that we just did for our hbox, we'll create our scene object. We'll just call that scene with all lowercase. So equal to a new scene, that constructor, and then we'll go ahead and pass in our hbox. And then finally, at the end here, we're going to go ahead and call the different methods for our primary stage. So primary stage dot set scene. We'll give it that scene object. We'll then do primary stage dot set title. For this one, since this is going to be our first application that actually uses a scene, we'll go ahead and call this my first scene. And then finally, we'll go ahead and make sure that it's actually displaying. So we'll call that show method. Go ahead and save all of that. Extra space. And once we've got all this set up, then we'll go ahead and run this application and see what it looks like. So we'll click run. And there we go. So it might be kind of hard to see right now, but our application window is actually being displayed right here. So you can see the little text for our label, Hello World, but you also notice something kind of interesting that it's done now that we've started adding some content to a scene, which is that the window is much smaller than it was before. So the issue that we're running into right now, if we want to go ahead and fix this right here, we can just go ahead and expand that out a little bit. So we can go ahead and see that title, my first scene, make sure all of our buttons are displaying in the upper right hand corner or upper left hand corner if you're doing this on a Mac. But the problem that we're running into right now is that when we add some content to a scene in our JavaFX applications, what's going to happen is the window size is only going to be large enough to display that content that we've put in there. What that's known as is the default window size, and there's actually a way to override that so that it isn't terribly small as it was before. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, come back over here for a moment, and let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. So by default, the scene is going to be set to its preferred size. So another way we could describe that is not simply just the default window size, but the preferred window size. It's going to be just large enough to display the contents of the scene. So in that example that we just saw, its default or its preferred size was just large enough to display the one label that we put in there. In this example that we have right here, we're going to include two additional arguments to our scene constructor. So the very first one was the top level container. So that's basically the container that holds everything that we want to include in our scene. For our second and third arguments, the second argument, this 300 that we have, that's going to be for the width of the scene. And then for the third argument, that's going to be for the height of the scene. So in this particular case, we were going to have a scene that is 300 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. So let's go make that quick modification. So coming over here, right here in our scene constructor, in addition to making the HBox our top level container, we'll go ahead and give it a width of 300 and a height of 100. We'll save that, and then we'll go ahead and run it. So now when we run it, we can see the window is a little bit larger, not necessarily large enough for the entire title to display, but at least reasonably larger than it was before. There is another issue that we're running into though, which is that the text Hello World is kind of pushed up into this upper left hand corner. So typically whenever you're using a GUI application, you probably see all the content kind of more towards the middle, or at the very least spaced out in such a way that it doesn't feel like it's just kind of crammed into a single corner of the application window, at the very least assuming that the interface is actually well designed. So let's see if we can actually go ahead and fix that as well. So if we take another look over here, we can also take a look at the alignment of our containers or the content that's inside of those containers. So the controls inside of our HBox layout container can actually be aligned to a specific position within that container. This will involve the use of another class that we're going to get from JavaFX. This is going to be for the pos, short for position class. This class is going to come from the geometry package. So we see that import statement there, javafx.geometry.pos. Once we've imported that, the way that we can actually use it is that there are a couple of different constants we can specify. So we can actually see a list of all 9 of them here, also showing their relative position, assuming that this the outer border of this table that I've included is essentially like the outer perimeter of an HBox container. If we do pos.top left, everything's pushed to the top left corner. If you do pos.top center, everything's pushed to the top, but in the middle horizontally. If we do say pos.center, that's going to put things right in the very center, both vertically and horizontally. For most of the applications we're going to be doing, we'll be using that pos.center pretty frequently to make sure that everything is aligned in a way that is aesthetically pleasing. In order to do that, we've included a line of code as well. So we've got hbox.setAlignment. So the setAlignment method is what we're going to be using to actually go ahead and set the alignment for our container. and then we're going to pass in one of these constants from that pause class. So in this case, we're doing pause.center. So let's go make that modification to our application as well. So coming over here, once we've set up our hbox, just underneath it, we'll go ahead and do hbox.setAlignment. And right inside of here, we're going to need to add something from the pause class. Obviously, if we want to do that, since we're working from NetBeans, we can go ahead and just type that in like this. And since this is going to be a class that it can recognize pretty easily, I could just come over here and just click on this and just add the import. So just go ahead and do the other half of the step for me. So we're going to do that. We'll take a quick look up here, and we can see that import statement being added right here. So it's going to be import javafx.geometry.pause. If you're working from something that's a bit more bare bones than an IDE like NetBeans, just make sure that you go ahead and follow both of those steps independently. So you go ahead and bring in the pause class using this import statement, and then go ahead and set up this line of code here to actually make some use out of it. So we'll go ahead and save that, and then we'll run this application again. And now we can see the text being displayed right in the middle of the application window. Okay. So at this point, this is going to cover getting our first application set up, as well as being able to demonstrate a couple of pretty simple ways to go about customizing the appearance of it. That includes things like adjusting the dimensions of our scene, as well as correcting the alignment of the content, so we can have something that looks a bit more at least a little bit more presentable, or a little bit more professional. Going into the next video, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that design process that I've been skipping over, where we're going to be looking over what are known as scene graphs that we use to actually map out the hierarchy of content that we're adding to our JavaFX applications. So we'll take a look at that in the next video.